He is the head of the Center for Security Policy, securefreedom.org, counterjihad.com, and also the vice chair on the Committee on the Present Danger of China. You can go to presentdangerchina.org. And he's got a new hour-long television program, Securing America with Frank Gaffney, on America's Voice News Network. Frank, where do you get that? Where's America's Voice News? How do they come across that?
It's a digital platform, Alex, and the way to get it is americasvoice.news.
Voice.news. Okay, fine. So go over there, and you can check out Frank's hour-long broadcast, and I'll make sure to check that out. And we can talk about it next time, Frank. So congrats on that. Let's get into some of the news, and why don't you react to what I opened with, which is that pretty stunning that Donald Trump, who came into the presidency with zero foreign policy experience, is there were zero questions about foreign policy in the first presidential debate. Not to say that there won't be some in subsequent debates, but literally not discussed. Any reaction to that?
It is generally the case, Alex, I'm afraid, in these presidential debates that national security is kind of an afterthought. And that's because, I guess, the calculation is for most Americans, they assume that we're the world's sole superpower and that whoever's president is going to keep it that way and keep us secure, and that we can just focus on domestic problems that are most immediately facing a lot of us and therefore of particular interest to us, notably the economy. And at the moment, the COVID-19 virus, which sadly the president and first lady have just been diagnosed as having, of course, as you know. This is a short-sighted attitude. And in fact, despite the best efforts of the organizers to essentially remand national security to some tertiary role in the three debates, it came up, and it came up rather insistently in connection with what is, I think, better described as the Chinese Communist Party virus and the damage that it has done to our country, our economy, our people, our Constitution, and the role that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, has played in sort of exemplifying a big problem with respect to the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that it poses to us, quite apart from that virus, namely that we've been enabling it, underwriting it, and otherwise making it much more dangerous of an adversary than it would otherwise be. So these things leach in, but it's a mistake, I think, of the first order for us not to actually have them front and center, especially because, Alex, as we've talked about week upon week, whoever the next commander-in-chief is going to be, job one for them, whether they're looking at the national security portfolio, which typically preoccupies presidents, or the economic one, or, well, the public health one, China is going to be job one.
I think that you're right about this, and I think that people kind of stop doing the math when they think, well, if we lose America as we know it, if we lose, it's in the process of happening, and, we talk about on the show, that as we get further away from American values, from the Constitution, from Judeo-Christian ethics, that what made this country so great, liberty, in God we trust, e pluribus unum, as we get further away from that stuff, Frank, and you can assume that whatever this new woke version of America is not going to have a ton of longevity. So then what comes after that? And for me, it's just going to be more China and more that we're a tributary state of China. And that's the most logical thing. I'm not saying I'm guaranteeing it or predicting it. I'm just saying that is a path that we are on. And it's probably worth 5 minutes during these debates that what is happening to the country. and who is going to take advantage of any weakness that we have at the moment, even if it's domestic weakness, Frank. You can bet China's licking their chops, and I'll tell you, you can just read their own propaganda, and you know that's true. They had a story about how the debates, they were selling authoritarianism as the salvation from the embarrassing and chaotic debate. Because remember, democracy is embarrassing and chaotic, and what they have in China is comparatively stable. It's authoritarian. It's horrible. They harvest organs. They intern people in concentration camps. They have no press freedom. Their economy stinks compared to ours. They take advantage of people, but it's more stable, and that's what they're going to sell to us.
Oh, there are no debates in China, is the point, basically. And there aren't a lot of other things either, Alex, and you just enumerated some of the most important ones. But yes, make no bones about it. This is a time when the Chinese are not only licking their chops at the prospect that we will succumb to their new order of things, but they're doing everything they can to bring that about. And just to give you a couple of examples, Alex, they've made, again, no secret of the fact that they want Donald Trump defeated in this re-election cycle. And they're working hard, I think, to try to accomplish that. The COVID-19 virus they sent our way deliberately, whether they engineered it or not, once it was out, they made sure that we had it. And they did that in part, I think it's interesting to note, I think informed by a tabletop exercise that was done back in, I believe, October of 2019 by the Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation and the Davos World Economic Forum and, oh, by the way, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and the U.S. and Chinese Centers for Disease Control. It was called Event 201. You can find the whole videotape of this tabletop exercise on the web. Check it out, because it modeled what would happen to world governance, which, again, the Chinese have their vision of it, the globalists have their vision of it, but my money's on the Chinese if it comes to that. But it was how all of those big new world order deals would benefit from a worldwide coronavirus pandemic. And sure enough, that's what I think we've seen the Chinese engineering. And I think they believe it is helping to bring about circumstances under which Donald Trump will be defeated. I personally think Xi Jinping must be gleeful at the fact that he has actually accomplished now the affliction of the president and first lady themselves with this CCP virus. But be that as it may, Alex, here's the point. Whether it's the COVID virus, whether it's what it's done to our society, whether it's another, I believe, developing story, which is it appears there is Chinese involvement in Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the rioting that they're doing in our streets. This is, again, part of the unrestricted warfare playbook of the Chinese Communist Party: social disorder, mayhem, and rioting. So all of these things are combining, I believe, to underscore the true malevolence of the Chinese Communist Party and the fact that it is our enemy. And finally, the fact that we have people in this country, notably organizations, I call them Beijing's bankers, like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan Chase and Morgan Stanley and Citigroup, that are actively enabling that enemy to become more formidable. For example, those four firms are trying to bring about the world's largest IPO, initial public offering in history, for a very, very problematic Chinese Communist Party company called Ant Technology Group. They are working hand in glove with the Chinese, perhaps to raise as much as $100 billion for this company and the CCP. This is insane, Alex, and it's got to be very much front and center in the debate about who is going to be our next commander-in-chief, and do they understand the true malevolence and threat we're facing from the Chinese Communist Party?
So, Frank, though it makes logical sense, what is the evidence that China is involved?
Well, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. I mean, we closed the Houston consulate of China because it appears the government of the United States determined that it was being used as a vehicle for identifying, I gather through TikTok, no less, who might be susceptible to recruitment for rioting and reaching out to help them connect up with Black Lives Matter, which, as you know, is run by Maoist, Marxist leaders. They are spin-offs of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and one of its splinters, the Liberation Road. My colleague Trevor Loudon has written extensively on this. These are long-time Chinese Communist Party United Front operations. There's also something called the Chinese Progressive Association, Alex, which is essentially run out of the Chinese consulates in San Francisco and Boston. In Boston, they have an annual event that this CPA, as it's called, engages in, which is to raise the Chinese Communist flag over the public square in Boston. This is what we call in the intelligence business a tell. And the point is that you look at these various examples, and Antifa, of course, has its long-standing ties to, international communist operations as well. They are aggressively pursuing revolution inside the United States for the same purpose as the Chinese Communist Party has, which is the destruction of this constitutional republic and country. And you put all that together, and I think this is one of those places where we see the enemy within is being very much enabled by the enemy without.
What's interesting is I was thinking about this because I'm on a bit of an Orwell kick, and how the main lesson of Animal Farm, which I think is I prefer it to even 1984, is that the animals are this democratic socialist ideal, and it's noble and doomed to fail. And what overwhelms it, Frank? It's the communism. The communism takes over, and that's when all hope is lost. And I'm just seeing this play out, that you've got literal democrat socialists who are kind of making these rapid changes to American life. We're not really thinking of it through. It's mostly emotional. It's mostly done out of passion. And if you don't conform right away, then you're going to get canceled to one degree or the next. In waiting in the wings, I see China out there seeing us weakening ourselves and ready to swoop in. And so when the democratic socialism eventually fails, we've seen this before. It was written out. The playbook is there. It's there. It's Animal Farm. This is it. And China is the communist ready to come in and take control. And this is something where I feel like I say this, and the more people are listening to this and thinking, well, this is kind of nutty that Marlow's saying this. They're not saying it's a playbook, Frank. It's written out. It's there. We know how this plays.
Well, it's not just a playbook in the theoretical sense, Alex, but as you know, it is what actually has happened when democratic socialists or socialists of other stripes initially bring about the opportunity for communists to take over. What's always interesting about it, Alex, is the first people to be lined up and shot, typically in those circumstances, are the socialists. That the communists have no use for them once they've helped bring them to power. So the point is, we're dealing with a deadly serious enemy in communist China, and it is using these tried and true techniques. And the really interesting thing about it, Alex, is at the heart of the Marxist-Leninist Maoist ideology is the idea that it's not just enough to win the ballot box or to have the triumph of their ideas and so on. They must engage in violence to defeat and crush the opposition. So that's what's afoot at the moment to some extent, but you can bet, I think, if this election turns out not to their liking, there will be a lot more of it, and it will continue until it is stopped. And that will require some violence too, I believe, unfortunately.
Hey, but Frank, eventually we could have stability. No prosperity, but we could have some stability. Okay, so let's change gears and let's have a couple other things I want to bring up to you. I can't resist this one. Let me check, see if we have audio. But H.R. McMaster was on MSNBC, and he accused the president, or he accused Vladimir Putin of I guess he accused Trump of aiding and abetting Putin's efforts on election interference. I had a reaction to this one, Frank, which is it's always the people you most expect. It's never the people you least expect. It's always the people you most expect. I mean, this guy he rubbed MAGA country the wrong way from the second he was installed by the president's national security advisor. And I don't know if there's a person in the administration we wrote more negative articles on at Breitbart than McMaster, and he's certainly not disappointing since he's left the White House.
It's not improved, that's for sure. Do you have tape, or do you want me to just respond?
I don't have tape.
Okay. Well, look, this is a bit of a confused interview, as far as I could tell. It wasn't entirely clear whether he was condemning Vladimir Putin for his interference in our elections, which, again, Alex, just as a momentary digression, pales into insignificance compared to what we were just talking about in terms of the Chinese involvement in our election, their interference, their efforts to try to take down the president of the United States. But anyway, McMaster wants you to focus on that shiny object over there. But he also wants you to sort of believe that everything we've learned about Donald Trump and the Russians, which is to say, he is not their cat's paw. He is not doing their bidding. He is not benefiting from their support. In fact, what John Ratcliffe just the director of national intelligence declassified the other day, said they were working with Hillary Clinton all along, and Hillary Clinton was directly involved in trying to get injected into defeating Donald Trump. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But one thing is clear. H.R. McMaster was a disaster as the national security advisor to the president of the United States, and he is not, as you've indicated, improving with age now that he's out of office.
Yeah, and he knows how to sell books. I'm assuming he's got a book out because it's the only reason why you want to talk. So, yeah, there you go. So just say horrible stuff about the president, and that's a good way to make money. It is that is the new big time consulting gig, I guess, because I guess when people can't lobby as effectively because Trump's a little more immune or impervious to that. I guess this is the way to wet your beak in Washington is you just say horrible things about the president, make a bunch of money on a book. Let's turn to, this is going to be a hard pivot, to Azerbaijan. And this is the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict is looking increasingly like it could become more of a global issue. It's a region that we don't talk about very often. Feels like once a decade or so. Could you give us the rundown on what's happening in the Nagorno-Karabakh region? Something that I feel like we had a Nagorno-Karabakh news cycle, Frank, 25 years ago or something. I think that's ringing a bell.
Yeah,
but that was
it's a hardy perennial. Exactly.
Yeah.
Look, Alex, the short form of it is this.
Exactly.
There is a Christian nation called Armenia, which has a so-called enclave, which is Muslim, called Nagorno-Karabakh, which an adjacent country called Azerbaijan has long said is really, by rights, part of its country. And as you've indicated, episodically, this turns into a violent clash. What's particularly important about the present clash, which is just spiked up, is that a country that is nominally an ally of the United States is actively seeking to exacerbate this conflict, and that would be Recep Tayyip Erdogan's Turkey. And one of the ways in which this Sharia supremacist regime in Turkey, which is in fact no ally of this country, is engaging in this is to bring, apparently, Syrian jihadis who have been fighting in that country's civil war for years to Nagorno-Karabakh to engage in the fighting there. And that's a problem in a couple of respects, because what they're going to do is not just intensify the fighting and bring probably a lot of hard-earned combat experience to bear, but Alex, it reminds me of the Balkans, back in the Clinton administration, which the Turks were also involved in, by the way. And you may remember that the Muslim nation that part at the time was part of Yugoslavia before it fell apart and then became its own country, Bosnia-Herzegovina, became radicalized by these Sharia supremacists as a result of the conflict that wore on there for quite some time between Christian Serbs and Croats on the one hand and Muslims in Bosnia. And the trouble is that radicalization, the country of Azerbaijan has been a relatively moderate Muslim country for a long time, but it will become more and more of a jihadist one, I'm afraid, as a result of what the Turks are up to. And this is all part of the larger effort that Erdogan is making to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. A neo-Ottoman caliphate is what he aspires to, with him as the caliph, making him that much less of an ally and that much more of a problem for us and the Israelis and the Gulf nations and people throughout the Middle East as well.
So, Frank, this is interesting because I think you're sort of answered this already, but I want to ask it directly. So what is the United States' role in this? Because you've got, again, because of NATO, Turkey's supposed to be an ally, but it looks like Turkey is the one who's really kicking up the dirt in the region. And so the United States doesn't seem like we've weighed in at all. Is that what you predict will hold, or do you think we're going to have to pick a side here? Or what are the various scenarios?
It's a good question, Alex, and I don't really know. I have the feeling that for the next 4 weeks, we're not going to do much. And I think the president would be averse to getting much engaged. Diplomats will certainly be paying some attention to it. And I happen to think we have the best diplomat in my lifetime running the State Department at the moment, and that's Mike Pompeo. But what our role would be, I don't know. I do think that to the extent that we're likely to see this translate into yet another killing field, or at least opportunity for persecution of Christians, it's another reason why we ought to be taking a side, and that is opposing Erdogan and his operations and supporting Armenia and those who have suffered, literally genocide at the hands of the Turks in the past.
Frank Gaffney, he's Center for Security Policy lead. He's also on the Committee of Present Danger China, where he serves as vice chair, and he's got a new show, Securing America, Frank Gaffney, on America's Voice News Network. Frank, very cool. Always appreciate the time, the news, and the analysis.
Thanks for fitting me in. Great to talk with you, Alex. Bless you.
As always, we'll talk to you next Wednesday. We'll be right back.